I'm Susan Gore, of the Wyoming Liberty Group, and we're here tonight because we care. We care about what's happening to our children and young people. And so we are most pleased to welcome Michelle Malkin to speak about the Common Core and the government takeover of local control in education. Michelle is an insightful and courageous commentator. She pulls back the curtain of confusing terms to reveal the insidious forces we face as Common Core proponents try to lull us into conformity with contrived and always centralized standards that are not good for our children. They try to lull us into a conformity with these standards. Such standards as these would deprive our children of a true education. Tonight, Michelle is here to remind us that we can say no to this nonsense and that we can move on to establish an educational environment worthy of a free people. The music stopped just in time for me to read a quote. Read a quote from Michelle's brilliant words. The principles that unite parents of all ideologies against the Fed Ed are the bedrock tenets of our constitutional republic: local control, parental sovereignty, privacy protections, and fundamental skepticism about the educational benefits of massive government expenditures in the name of reform. The Davids of the Stop Common Core movement are exercising their freedoms of speech and association to beat back the deep-pocketed Goliaths at their schoolhouse doors. We at the Wyoming Liberty Group resonate with Michelle's bold, no-nonsense unmasking of lies. It is easy to get the mistaken idea that Common Core advocates have the best interest of our children at heart. That is why Michelle Malkin's tireless advocacy of educational sanity is so crucial. That is why she is an inspiration to caring and conscientious parents and educational professionals. And that is why we are honored and delighted to have her here with us tonight. Please help me welcome Michelle Malkin.
Thank you. With all of you. And the first thing that I want to say is thank you. Because the activists, the parents, the educators, the administrators, the school board members, and I'm being told to turn on my other mic. Although with my loud mouth, I know you can hear me. Voila. I'm turned on. And I know you all are too. I really do need to express my gratitude for those of you who have been on the front lines of this battle against not only Common Core, and I think for those of you who have had your eyes opened and who've been through many of the same kind of experiences that I'm going to talk about, personal experiences on the ground level, you understand that Common Core is just the latest Trojan horse. It's just the newest version of a long-time fight against many encrusted, I call them educrats, right? The bureaucracy whose main interest is not academic excellence or rigor, is not our best interests of our children at their hearts, but whose main driving agenda and purpose is holding on to power, self-preservation of their political ideology and their political machine. Before it was Common Core, it was No Child Left Behind. Before it was No Child Left Behind, it was outcome-based education. Before that, it was Goals 2000, School to Work. They're so very good at morphing it into something new when they realize that their same old has become controversial. And that's what's happening with Common Core right now, isn't it? We gotta find a new name. And what makes this battle so tough, so difficult, so arduous, is that it's not just that limited government advocates and those of us who consider ourselves constitutional conservatives have to battle the usual suspects, the ones we know, the explicit opponents on the left, but that there are so many people who speak the language of autonomy and local control and school choice who are on the other side. And in many cases, it's big business Republicans who are the most vicious in their criticism of those of us who dissent, those of us who refuse to conform. For me, the context of why it matters to me and why I've been at it for so long is important. And one of the things that the left is so good at doing is telling stories, right? Connecting. It doesn't matter that many times their stories aren't true. And we've got the fabulist in chief, who's so very good at telling stories. But it's a very potent way of connecting with people and making them understand that you're not just talking about these issues from 30,000 feet on high. They're real, they affect you, they shape your lives, they shape your choices, they shape your own children's futures. As many of you know, and my life is an open book, unlike some politicians, my parents came here from the Philippines in 1970, and they came here legally. And I think that's a pertinent fact. Because before they stepped foot in this country, they had to learn English, they had to pay all their fees, they had to pay a lot of legal fees, they had to go through medical screening, they had to learn to appreciate the foundations of this constitutional republic before they ever set foot in the country. And so when they came here and began their journey to the American dream, they embraced and were assimilated in founding principles which are anathema to the current political elite. And one of the reasons they came here was to improve the lives of their children, and one of the main ways that they realized would create a path to a better future was a good education. My father was a neonatologist who took care of premature babies on the East Coast, and my mother was a public school teacher. And I believe that this is a pertinent fact in many of these debates, because I'm sure many of you have experienced the ad hominem attack that somehow if you raise your voice, even in the most polite and gentle way, questioning Fed Ed, you are immediately accused of what? Teacher bashing. Hating teachers, hating public schools, hating academic excellence, hating children. The children, the children. We hate children. Well, I loved myself as a child, and I certainly love my own children, who are now 14 years old and 10 years old. And I want what Barack and Michelle Obama and Arnie Duncan and Jeb Bush and Mike Huckabee all say they want: the best education possible for my children. And yet these people have no qualms about immediately going on the attack. And that is one of the most insidious strategies of the big government, big business, Fed Ed complex, industrial complex. They co-opt the language of excellence. They co-opt the language of caring. And immediately we're on the defensive. Because the first thing we have to say is, oh, no, I don't hate teachers, and I don't hate children. And so by the time you get done trying to persuade them that you are not a beast or a dragon lady, there's nothing I can do to persuade the other side that I'm not a dragon lady. There's barely any time anymore to tackle the actual substance of why we object to these schemes. And so you have to be prepared. The best offense sometimes is a best defense. So I point this out. And I talk about, with many people on the other side, those who are willing to listen, the fact that these battles are not theoretical for me. And I want to tell you, some of you may have heard this story, but I think it's definitely worth talking about this journey, because the battles that my family has had over math, I love the knowing chuckles, are illustrative of all of the battles that we face with Common Core, whether it's the English language arts standards. Everything needs ghost quotes with these people. Or the math standards, the history standards that are now so radioactive, and the next-gen science standards, which are also coming down the pike. Let me take you back to 2002, 2006, 2007. I was still a hostage of the Beltway. Lived in D.C. And the D.C. culture. And we were sending our oldest, our 14-year-old daughter, who was in first or second grade at the time, to a very Tony, she private school. And I mention that because it is also an important lesson that the reach of Fed Ed is not merely into the public schools. There's no safe space from the Fed educracy. You can put your kids in what you think is a protected sanctuary, a classical charter school, private secular or religious school, homeschool, and we're homeschooling my 6th grade son right now. There's no escape. Which is why it's so important that every single person who is aware of what's going on speak up. We can't afford to have people on the sidelines who know what's going on. And every voice counts in these battles. It doesn't matter if you're just leaving comments on the local paper's website. It matters. Because in this battle, the people on the other side understand that optics matter. And if it looks like the popular sentiment is on their side, they will exploit that. If there's a vacuum on pushback, they'll exploit it. Well, at this private school that we were sending my daughter to, the first year was pretty unremarkable. She was getting worksheets back for math that were very, very simple and elementary. Didn't mind that. And then the next year, she was getting the same exact worksheets. What's going on here? She wasn't in a remedial class. Where was the progress? I started looking at the worksheets, and it turned out that the math was not really math. It seemed more like arts and crafts. Right? So she was coloring numbers, she was cutting them out, she was pasting them on another piece of paper, but there was no computation involved. And we raised the issue with the teacher, and my husband, who is really the math... See, this is what's so ironic, is that I am the least mathematically capable Asian American in America. Okay? I confess. okay? So my husband started pestering the teacher, and it came back to us that it wasn't an error. In fact, this was a strategy. There's another buzzword, and I heard the knowing chuckle here. Everything's a strategy. Well, this is a strategy. What is the strategy? They had a name for it. Spiraling. What the hell is spiraling? What? Oh, it's when we just come back around and we do the same thing over. Well, she already did that. Can she start adding the numbers now? Because the spiraling is starting to give us a headache. Oh, now just trust us. These are very tested, effective strategies. We kind of let it go for a couple of weeks, and there's still no progress. And I started to take a closer look at these worksheets. They were not coming from a book. This sort of raised my eyebrows. And we looked closer at the fine print, and it said that it was the University of Chicago. Okay, now at the time I didn't groan right away because I thought, Milton Friedman, economic school, how can it be bad? It's the University of Chicago. Well, of course, Milton Friedman had nothing to do with this. He'd be rolling in his grave if he knew I'd even made such an association. It was the University of Chicago Education Department. And the name of this strategy, this method, these textbooks, was Everyday Math, otherwise known in pedagogical circles as Chicago Math. Now, my father-in-law is here, and he's from Chicago. And so, with present company accepted, we all know that Chicago is the root of all evil. And all sorts of bells and red flags started going off in our heads. And we did one of those things that the Fed Ed establishment absolutely abhors. We started to do our own homework, because that is our responsibility as parents. We are our children's primary educational providers. And we started talking to other parents, and boy, did things start getting dangerous, because my blessed husband had the wonderful good faith idea of forming an after-school math group for girls who had a passion and an interest and a talent at math, and who wanted to go further than spiraling around coloring numbers. So he asked the administration of this Tony private school that we're paying out the nose for, could we please find a corner in the rolling campus, which was larger than our college campus, had a ballet studio, state-of-the-art computer lab, science lab. Is there just a few feet, even a closet, where they call themselves the Math Scholars Program? And just a pause button here. This private school was an all-girls school. Now, many of you who have been slogging through the educational wars know that one of the main arguments for single-sex schools has always been, girls need a safe space where they can thrive, particularly in the academic subjects where they had been getting short shrift. And what were the top two? Math and science. So you would think that this school, by the way, it's Bryn Mawr School in Baltimore, so avoid it at all costs and tell your friends on the East Coast, because I always name names, right? Bryn Mawr School, founded by the same old founders that had founded Bryn Mawr College. So my husband asked, could these wonderful female math scholars find a place to meet after school and do advanced math? What do you think the answer was? No. And the implicit answer was, hell no. So they met on the grass, in the park, at a Panera, anywhere else. And meanwhile, all sorts of heartburn was being caused by the mere existence of a math scholar group that was showing up the rest of the class. They were stigmatized the same way that girls arguably had been stigmatized in non-single-sex schools, integrated schools. What is going on here? Wait, it gets better or worse. So while my husband was doing his job as a parent with other parents and trying to instill a passion and love for math in these girls, I was still Googling, typing, digging, searching. And it turned out that we were not alone. And that in 2007, the Texas School Board of Education had decided that they were going to drop the middle school everyday math curriculum because the test results that were coming back after these kids had been subjected and tortured with everyday math, which, by the way, in parental circles is known as every night math, because every night you're struggling to figure out what the heck is going on, they dropped the middle school curriculum. Now, of course, if Texas drops something, this is very alarming, because all of the textbook monopolists need Texas and California to drive their sales. So the everyday math establishment was in a panic after this. And what did these ideologues do in response to the Texas School Board of Education? The same tactic they use against any dissenters of their agenda. Polarize, personalize, attack. Oh, those Neanderthals don't want kids to learn math because they don't care about kids and they hate teachers. But there was a fly in their ointment, something that was ruining their narrative. Good teachers, of whom there are still hundreds of thousands in this country, were realizing the scam. And it turned out that in inner city Harlem, of all places, teachers in minority-majority school districts were starting to rise up because it had been imposed by the New York City chancellor there, Joel Klein, who, these people never go away. Joel Klein, of course, has been a big champion of Common Core, and cha-ching, making a lot of money off of it, too. Anyway, there was this grassroots revolt. There was a group of teachers and parents that had formed called New York City Hold, which I love the acronym. It stands for something like hoping for an honest, open, logical debate on mathematical education reform. I know, it's a pipe dream, isn't it? And these teachers lobbied to exempt, to opt out. That's this familiar concept. Please just let us do our own thing. We know what's best for these minority students. They want to learn math the traditional way, and the test results show that traditional ways of learning math, old, standard, white guy algorithms, work well for students of all colors. We can't let the hostages go free, because if they go free, then everybody else will want to be free, and we can't have that. We need the captives. So, silly me, I decided to write a column about what was going on in New York City and what was going on in Texas. Remember the context. We were experiencing the same exact thing in Baltimore with my daughter. I didn't mention my daughter's school at that time. But somehow, the principal of the school read my column, which was published by the New York Post. Pretty interesting that she was reading the New York Post. But A week after the column was published, ring, we got a phone call to come in to the school for a meeting. My husband was not available, but I decided that I would go. But before that meeting, we had tried to resolve things with the math curriculum director. And she tried to sell us on everyday math. And you won't believe how she decided to sell us on this. Now, by this time I knew that the middle school math curriculum of everyday math was asking kids questions like these. And this might be familiar to some of you. If math were a color, what color would it be? This is not an Onion parody or a late-night comedy joke. For real. Oh, there was a better follow-up. If math were a food, what food would it be? I don't know, but I'm about to throw up. The math curriculum director sat us in front of a chalkboard. And she went about trying to explain to us the new way of multiplying. Now, this new way of multiplying was meant to raise girls' self-esteem. Because it opened their minds to alternative strategies of finding answers to problems. Now, the practical translation of that is that it took twice as long to get the answer than the self-esteem damaging way that we have been multiplying for decades. Some of you might remember that great Tom Lehrer parody, New Math. You could sing it, Marty. Please? Do you remember any of it?
No.
Oh, come on. Okay, well, I'm off key. Yes. So let me quote. I'm not going to sing either. I'm not going to subject you to that. But he's got a line there where he explains the new fuzzy math. In the new approach, as you know, the important thing is to understand what you're doing rather than to get the right answer. And then he goes on to warble, so you've got 13 and you take away 7 and that leaves 5, well, 6 actually, but the idea is the important thing. And this pretty much sums up not only the constructivist method of math, the constructivist whole language strategy of reading, which throws out grammar, and the basic principles of writing, but it also explains what drives these Common Core standards. Okay? Because you have all these empty kabuki phrases about how we can't just have them memorized. We can't just have them learned by rote. They need critical thinking skills. And when you ask, well, how can they think critically if there's nothing in their heads? Hello? Miss Math Curriculum Director plunges headlong into her explanation of everyday math's lattice multiplication. And she's got this whole chart. It's like a Glenn Beck whiteboard. And the two numbers that she's multiplying are going around, and it's getting bigger. Okay, where's the answer? I can't. We looked up this lattice multiplication online, and there is a terrific video that was done at about the time that we were fighting this by a meteorologist in Seattle named M.J. McDermott. And you've got to look it up, and you've got to sit your kids down and watch this, because she completely destroyed and deconstructed these methods, these strategies, the absurdity. And I always go back to that moment when I was in the classroom sitting with my husband watching all of this and just shaking my head. Because it's the same old, except now that it's broken through. And like I said, the message that we've gotten over the last decade is how we're not alone. Because when you have, some of you know that there's a comedian named Louis C.K. Look this up too if you don't know who he is. Guy is not a Tea Party member, I'll tell you. He's way on the other side politically. But he's as interested in the advancement of his children's education as all of us are, and just as flummoxed and flabbergasted at the ridiculous things that are going on in his kid's classroom. And so he talked about it on one of these late night comedy shows, oh, they're all the same to me. They all hate us. One of the same thing with even Stephen Colbert. They're all mocking the same things that we've been struggling with and fighting with. I welcome that. I mean, we all should, because suddenly it's amplifying a battle that's been going on so long, and the silliness of it just speaks for itself. There's a problem in raising our voices, and I have a special name for the concept of this, but for those of you who have read Friedrich Hayek, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about the fatal conceit. Right? The idea of these high and mighty central planners who anoint themselves experts and who form a clique and a club and a sort of a Sorbonne of bureaucracy. And only their pronouncements count. And it doesn't matter if it's education or the environment or any other domestic or foreign policy. They're the experts, and all knowledge is vested in them. Thomas Sowell talked about the vision of the anointed. The same thing. And this is such an effective way of stifling dissent, particularly by parents. It's just a mom syndrome. And I'll tell you a little bit about where that comes from. Some of you might know. I was doing some cable TV slugfest about a year ago with Juan Williams on Fox News. And he has this, just like a lot of people in DC on both sides of the aisle, this expert syndrome. And I was making some point about the thank goodness, now departing Eric Holder. Yes, we can let that all out. Oh, by the way, and this may, for those of you who are teaching your kids in classics, Chuck Schumer had the gall to compare Eric Holder today to Horatius at the Bridge. Yeah, that's an emetic right there. Oh, my goodness. Of course, given Common Core history, most people's eyes glazed over. They probably don't even know what Horatius at the Bridge is, right? In any case, I had brought some salient point to this slugfest on some reporting that I had done on Eric Holder in a book that celebrated its 5-year anniversary this summer, Culture of Corruption. Yeah. And Juan Williams tried to delegitimize the facts that I'd brought to the table by calling me, and I quote, just a blogger. Just a blogger. Because, you know, I have a website and I blog. And since I'm a conservative blogger, there's no way that I could actually do journalism. Because only certain anointed people can be journalists. It doesn't matter that journalism is an act, right? It's not an exclusive club. And anyway, this is Juan Williams, who did what? Commentaries for NPR. Just as much a journalist as just a blogger. Well, a lot of you can relate to that, because if you've had to fight with teachers or layers of administration or bureaucrats or the state, even the governor's office here, right? If you're just a mom, just a taxpayer, just a citizen, your facts are discounted, your opinions are discounted, and your parental prerogative is discounted. And this, to me, is really one of the biggest outrages in fighting these battles. Again, what these people are doing is driving a wedge. It's not only about local control versus the Fed Ed Leviathan. What they're doing is trying to drive a wedge between parents and children. And here we get to really the heart of what's driving these schemes, that it's about control and power and money. Because they see our kids as their educational guinea pigs, whatever fad they want to test on them, whatever field test they want to throw at them. Look at how much time is spent in the school year away from actual instruction. How many days they spend preparing for tests that we don't want, and then testing them, and then collecting all the data for the databases. Oh, and then there are even things like, we have these in Colorado, count day. Do you know what count day is? Okay, this is the special day of the year when they need every single body in the classroom, because all of the funding for the school year is tied to the bodies in the classroom. So do you know what they do to make sure that to maximize the number of bodies in the classroom? They offer donuts, sugar, Jolly Ranchers, candy. Make sure your kid is in the classroom on this day, right? And then these are the same teachers that will gladly use your kids for sick-outs and strikes. Okay, this is happening on our side of the border in Colorado. Some of you who follow these things may know that in Jefferson County, where you've got a great, solid conservative school board that took over in the last year's elections, there are union leaders who are not happy with the $18.2 million salary compensation package that the school board just passed. That's not enough for them, because now the teachers will be based on parental feedback, student feedback on performance, right? And all but 2% of the teachers got raises. Not good enough. Not good enough. So you've had these sick-outs that are now the subject of New York Times stories. And what is the story? Well, no, they're not going to tell you the real story. They're going to mask the fact that it's about a fight over union control versus local school board accountability. What they're saying is that the fight is about censorship, right? And the school board is being mocked, and they're being accused of wanting to remove the teaching of slavery from the history curriculum. And how does this tie into Common Core? Because what the school board is worried about are the AP U.S. history standards. APUSH. Thank you for the knowing murmurs about that. This is the next thing coming down the pike. And the reason why it's a concern is because the same small cabal of people who wrote the Common Core standards behind the scenes in DC are the same people who are now pushing for these radical changes in the AP US history test. So, a couple of common themes here that we come back to. Again, there's no refuge, there's no sanctuary. You can put your kids in the greatest classical charter school, classical Christian school, homeschool them, but if they want AP credit and if they want to go on to college, they're going to have to take those tests. And one of the main architects behind the AP US history changes is a man named David Coleman. Yes, one of the most extreme progressive ideologues who was essentially the mastermind behind Common Core as well, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, in cahoots with another man who wrote some of these standards, Jason Zimba. The two of them formed a quote-unquote nonprofit educational association that is now in charge of implementing a lot of the standards across the country. It's a racket. It is a big racket. And the same thing that has driven a lot of my reporting on political matters, that same imperative is here, that we need to follow the money. Because there's a constellation of overlords that all have vested interests in imposing the agenda in every state, whether they took race to the top money or not, and a very vested interest in making sure that dissent is stifled, and that in particular, that local school boards are disempowered, that they have as little input as possible. And that, in fact, the exact opposite of what they pay lip service to, oh, these standards were grassroots, bottom up. When grassroots and bottom-up activists actually try to have input, they're not having it. The good news, of course, is that despite all the money that they have, all of the media power that they have, all of the savvy, all of the decades of bureaucrats who have been working on all of this, we've been able to surmount that in so many ways. And I attribute that in large part to groups like Wyoming Liberty Group and the parents here and the local rank and file teachers and educators and school board members and administrators who know what's going on and who truly have the best interests of our children at heart. I think another huge factor has been alternative media and the synergy that we can have. There was an old concept under the Soviet communist system where dissidents would operate underground samizdat's. Does that word ring a bell? Some of you. Underground printing presses where they would get the truth out. And that's essentially what Facebook and Twitter and the blogosphere and in some sense definitely with podcasts and local talk radios, hyper local talk radio. And the groundswell, it just shows you that, of course, this information wants to be free. It's going to get out there whether they like it or not. And so now we face a huge fork in the road, a tipping point in where this movement goes, because you've had a number of states, and some of you obviously are familiar with Oklahoma and Louisiana, where politicians who had been deeply entrenched with the Common Core establishment have seen the light. Now, whether those epiphanies are short-lived or not is really all dependent on the vigilance of anti-Common Core activists in the state. And Bobby Jindal is definitely an interesting example of that, because up until really just about 6 or 7 months ago, he was lockstep Siamese twin with Jeb Bush on all of these things. but making sure he stays on the right path and essentially serving as guardrails for these people is a good thing. Then, by contrast, you have very puzzling political animals like Mike Pence of Indiana. Yeah, except that he has made a gesture of rejecting Common Core, but engaging in the kind of disingenuous rebranding strategies, yes, that Jeb Bush and Mike Huckabee and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce have recommended. And then you have Wyoming. And it is an uphill battle that you face, but you had a great state superintendent in Cindy Hill who tried to do the right thing and was an early warner on these issues. And you've got heroes like Susan and Amy out there fighting for you and trying to make sure. And Tom, where's Tom? Tom, yes, and Marty. And we need the same kind of thing that the left is always so good at. You know, they always talk about solidarity, right? They will stick by each other, or do things by any means necessary, and we really have to be in it for the long war, because that's what this is. Somebody had mentioned to me in one of the interviews that I did preceding the event that the idea of a regional alliance, some sort of formal regional alliance among activists would be a good idea. And I love that, because the kind of information sharing and experience sharing that should be going on, I know it's going on in some informal way between Wyoming and Colorado, would be extremely helpful. You know, in Colorado just this week, one of the districts, school districts in Colorado Springs where I live, just voted to adopt a resolution opting out of one of the testing consortia for Common Core. Yes! And that testing consortia is PARC. Is that the one that you have here? Are you doing? You're doing SBAC. Well, you know, of course it's the same battle that you face, but exercising this option and even the mere act of standing up and saying no is so powerful, so potent, and so threatening. And it also reminds me of a scene that I found so much inspiration in our old hometown of Baltimore about a year ago. A man stood up at a school board meeting. It was in Baltimore County. And somebody just happened to have a video camera, which everyone should carry, right? We need the video camera brigade, right? He was questioning the dog and pony show that the local superintendent was putting on there for Common Core. His name was Robert Smalls. And he stood up and said to the other parents in the room, "Why are you standing for this? We have to speak up. Don't be a sheep," or as I say, sheeple. Don't be a sheep, stand up. And it was such a hair-raising video to watch, because a security guard came and manhandled him, and he was essentially arrested for speaking up for his children and speaking his mind. I've played that video so many times over the last year as a reminder, again, this message that we're not alone and that it takes just one voice. Because after that happened, all the floodgates opened from a media perspective. They finally understood it, and the producers thought, "Hey, that's good video." And they don't care about the things we care about. It's good video. And even TV stations that have had a vested interest in whitewashing Common Core had to cover it. You all know, by the way, that NBC News' education coverage is funded by the Gates Foundation. Gee, that makes sense, right? You're going to get the straight scoop from there? No. And then I have to say that even Fox News, which thank God they exist, and God bless them, I've spent a dozen years as a contributor. Fox News, of course, is owned by News Corp, Rupert Murdoch's big media conglomerate. Joel Klein works for a News Corp subsidiary that is one of the biggest educational technology companies plugged in to Common Core. And for a long time, many of you who've been at this might have been wondering, why aren't they covering it more? Follow the money. You got to follow the money. We have to make as much common cause as we can with people from all sides of the political spectrum. And that's my last message to you. Now, of course, I am a right-wing nutjob, fire-breathing dragon, and people will roll their eyes at the idea that I extend my hand to people from other sides of the aisle. But on an issue like this, I don't care. I don't care if you agree with me, I'm with you. Because we need everybody that we can get on this. And perhaps the most potent issue where left, right, and center come together, it's not just the curricular matters, but it's the privacy issues. And the data mining that is going on. I mean, it's bad enough when your kids are used as educational pawns, but when they are collecting intrusive data, by the way, which was facilitated by backroom changes that were not approved by Congress to the Federal Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA, a couple of years ago, that allowed the sale of your kids' data to third-party vendors and contractors. You should have civil rights absolutists, the ACLU, anyone that you can join with on that, because that is already well underway. And Jefferson County, which is the county that I just mentioned, you had a liberal mom and a conservative mom who got together to blow the whistle on one of these ed tech data miners called In Bloom. That name should ring a bell. And that set off a firestorm, which has led to, believe it or not, the dismantling of In Bloom. Yes, 2 moms did that. They built that, unbuilt it. Somebody asked me, well, what do we do now? What if you're just getting started in this battle? What if your eyes have just been opened? What do you do? And I think it's important to find a niche and to find where you can have the most value added in this battle. Some of us are investigators and watchdogs. Some of us are more comfortable behind the scenes than opening up their big mouths in front of a microphone. Some of us are number crunchers, PR people, diplomats in a way. There's a role for everyone on this. Some people love to just march up to the Capitol and knock on doors, and I think what's most important, and this is coming from somebody who spent so much of her professional career, in the Beltway and in New York City, this battle is going to be won outside of that bubble. Because the revolution started outside of that bubble, because the bubble is the problem, not the solution. And one of the things that I think that makes the West so special is that frontier spirit, the individualism that reigns here versus the collectivism of the Fed Ed blob. And, in much the same way that the Sagebrush Rebellion helped usher in the golden age of Reagan, I think that kind of Sagebrush Rebellion is going to ensure that the revolt that we've seen, the success that we've seen in turning back Common Core is continued and sustained. Because over the years, with all these iterations of FedEd that I've talked about, we always know they never give up. They don't stop. They know that we're so busy doing all the things that we're supposed to be doing, raising our families, running our own businesses, being engaged in our churches and our communities, and juggling all of that. It puts one hand tied behind our backs because they have people whose full-time lives is self-preservation of their power centers. And that in so many cases, we're paying for their jobs, right? We're paying for the public schools that are ruining everything in so many ways. And then we're paying for these union leaders who are agitating against us. We're paying for all of these politicians who spend so much of their time trashing us. We got to do all that and try and keep up the momentum in this fight. But, I always emphasize both parts of happy warrior, right? I'm not always so mean and outraged. Pretty happy to be, living outside the bubble where we live and raising our kids and doing the best we can. And the American dream that my parents came here for, always, you wake up and it seems so endangered all the time. But, if you've been at this long enough, you always feel that it's this close to being lost. But I think it's always good as a final reminder to have a sense of perspective. You've got places in the Middle East where girls are slaughtered for going to school, where kids are worried about dysentery, and places all around the world that are still stuck in the dark ages. And yet, the shining city on the hill may be a little bit tarnished, but we're still here. And that's our obligation. That is our duty. That's been every American generation's duty, as long as I've been alive, to make sure that we preserve it and make it better for the next. And I just want to reiterate again my gratitude for what each and every one of you do, and particularly for being here tonight to support the Wyoming Liberty Group. There's a funny section in those, the celebrity magazines at the newsstands. Right? It's called Stars. They're Just Like Us. You know what I'm talking about? And it shows all these big celebrities shopping at the grocery or pumping gas. Stars, they're just like us. And it's funny because sometimes when I go around speaking, in particular to moms, shout out to all the moms in this room who've been in this battle. No offense, dads, but sometimes they find it hard to believe that that we've actually been in, their same shoes. Now, hopefully you're not in these shoes, but which I only wore because I was warned how tall Amy was, and I really didn't want to feel like a kindergartner standing next to her. But at least for this pundit mom, yeah, I am just like you. I know the frustrations that you've had. I know what you've gone through. And, as long as I'm able to, I am there with you. I want to hear your stories. I want to stay in touch with what you're doing here in Wyoming to push back. It's so important to have those outward signs of dissent because it's an inspiration to everyone else. I didn't start out with this big mouth. This is the last thing I'll say. Are we doing Q&A? We could do that. That'll be fun. Unlike an Obama press conference, I'll take your questions. Okay. But I just want to say this because this might resonate with some of you in the room. For much of my childhood and even up until I entered college, I was painfully shy. I hated speaking in front of class. And in 7th grade, I failed my speech class. I was always a good writer, and I'd written the speech. It was 1982, and this was the year in which there was a horrible plane crash into the Potomac River. Do anyone remember this? Jog your memory? Okay, and so there was a post office worker named Lenny Skutnik who dived into the Potomac and rescued a couple of passengers from this plane crash into the ice. It was January 1982, icy, and it was a result of that act of heroism that Ronald Reagan started the tradition of honoring a citizen in the gallery during the State of the Union address. They've done it every year since, right? It started with him. And so I was so inspired by that I had written this speech. And the assignment for the speech class had been, write a speech about anything. Okay, so most of the kids wrote speeches, gave speeches about things like how to bake a cake or how to hit a home run, things like this. So I was pretty nervous. They did it alphabetical order and they got to me. And I took my papers out and I saw the eyes looking at me. And the teacher asked what the topic of my speech was. And I got caught in my throat, and I squeaked out, heroism. And some clown said, heroin? And I ran out the room, and I got an F for the speech class. And my tiger mom was not sympathetic at all. She didn't care how wonderful the speech was on paper. If you couldn't deliver, you deserved an F. And a few lessons like that, and in college as well, really reinforced for me that if I didn't speak up for myself, nobody would. And dun, 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 a nasty right-wing pundit was born. You have to be able to train yourself to craft your message and deliver it in a way that can resonate with people, obviously beyond those who are like-minded. And I think that's often taken for granted in a cable TV world, where the emphasis is always on heightening the conflict. Oh, I'm sure you can just search on YouTube and see the kinds of names that I have been called. Now, that doesn't mean that I can't give it back, because I have. But particularly on an issue like education, the need to cross over those barriers and surmount those barriers is really the key to success. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.